to protect both Google employees and Google users, many of whom are surely on this call today. Christian's given this talk at a couple of our webinars over the past, or a couple of our seminars over the past several months, and it is always one of the most highly regarded talks that we have, probably because it's one of the most compelling case studies we've seen on the quantifiable benefits that FIDO brings to the table. So again, we're very happy to share this with all of you today. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. You can ask questions in the chat dialog in your GoToWebinar client. You'll see a little chat box there, actually a question box. So if you ask those questions, we'll answer some of them midstream, and others we'll save until the end. At the end of Christian's presentation, we'll open it up for Q&A, so we'll be asking questions that you type in to the question box on your client. This is being recorded, and we will share a link to the archive of this, including the slides, as follow-up to the webinar. Lastly, at the end of the webinar, you'll be prompted to fill in a survey. If you can take a couple minutes to fill that out, we'd greatly appreciate it, as this helps shape our webinar program. So with that, let's get started. Christian Brand at Google. Christian.
Thanks, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. I'm Christian Brand, and I'm part of the team responsible for authentication here at Google. Now, over the next 30 minutes, I'm planning to share a case study regarding Google's deployment of FIDO technologies. And basically, to kind of kick this off, right, so enterprise adoption of the cloud has been accelerating lately. And we think this is a good thing, as cloud has become one of the best ways to capitalize on the increasing security and innovation. And as more and more services are really moving to the cloud, the question quickly becomes one of, can you afford not to migrate your security and identity systems to the cloud too? There we go. So over the last 18 years, Google has really built one of the largest and most secure infrastructure in the world to run and protect our own operations. And what's unique about our security position is our combined capability to protect against cyber threats, but also to innovate and move the needle in security. And when I think about Google's advantage in security, three things really stand out for me. The one is we have the opportunity to start from a blank slate. We were able to keep homogeneity, and then early on, we applied advanced computing capabilities, things such as machine learning, to solve big problems like spam. And this is all made available to you when you run your application or store your data within Google's cloud. Few providers have as much control over the entire technology stack as Google, and this allows us to have a high degree of homogeneity in our systems, as I mentioned on the previous slide. And it really makes detection easier if we can act faster, be more effective in our responses, and not really have to rely on third parties when addressing threats. And if we look at these components here on the slide, the stack kind of all the way from the hardware level up to the mobile, really it's firstly our custom designed hardware running in data centers. Second, we have full control over the operating systems on servers. We operate one of the largest telecommunication networks in the world. In most cases, data travels across our own fiber. On the application layer, binaries are constantly being audited. We have harder kernel-based virtual machines, ensuring that we have bit-level control over the apps that we're running. And this makes us uniquely resilient to certain types of threats. Think Rowhammer, for example. And this stretches all the way up to the mobile device, where unique technology, such as SafetyNet, for example, continuously attests to the integrity of your Android or your mobile device. But today, we're really here to talk about one of the biggest, if not the biggest threat to online security and privacy. And really, that's weak authentication. So, passwords are broken, right? This isn't new. Through a combination of users reusing passwords, sophisticated phishing schemes, password interception, users protecting their accounts with only a password are at risk. So here's two things on the slide, and I know this is kind of easier when I do this in presentation format in a session, but there's kind of two things on the slide right now, one on the left, one on the right. Take a guess. I'll leave you 2-3 seconds to kind of guess what these two numbers or these two kind of phrases represent. So on the left-hand side, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, That was the most popular password in 2015. And then on the right, let's take a look. That was the second most popular password in 2015. So it's not hard to imagine that passwords are a problem. So if we look at these two statistics here as well, 76%, so just over 3/4 of account vulnerabilities in 2015 were as a result of weak or stolen passwords. And that's according to a Verizon data breach report of 2015. And then Google has done our own study. We've published the results about 2.5 years ago. I can include a link in the deck here as well when we put this up online. But really what we found is that close to every 1 in 2 people, when they are confronted with a sophisticated phishing scam, they still give away their credentials. So even though we have this continuous education and all these processes going on where we're trying to convince our users to kind of be better at trying to detect and trying to kind of mitigate phishing attacks and phishing scams, users still fall for phishing attacks because in the end we're all still human. And really these attacks are so advanced that I don't think anyone can with beyond the shadow of a doubt these days say that they will be able to figure out what's a phishing attack versus what's a real login website, especially on the more sophisticated scale of these types of attacks. So basically, in a nutshell, passwords, broken, phishing, one of the biggest threats. And then again, according to the same data breach report from Verizon, more than 2/3 of security incidents reported in 2015 involved phishing in some form or another. So the industry has an answer to this, right? The answer to weak passwords really is multi-factor authentication. Now, multi-factor authentication, or two-step verification as we call it at Google, where a user needs to prove their identity by something they know, such as a password, and something they have, such as a mobile phone or maybe a key fob they carry around, can address some of these shortcomings. But the problem is, most multi-factor authentication solutions today are one-time password based. Now, while one-time passwords can protect against password reuse, for example, it is really not effective against phishing attacks. There's also many usability shortcomings and challenges with one-time password-based solutions. So that's kind of why we looked further. We looked to something else. And what we kind of came up with at FIDO is FIDO Universal Second Factor. And essentially, security keys, which is the instantiation or the little key fob that implements FIDO U2F, that I'll talk a little more about soon, security keys really was specifically designed to address the issues with one-time password-based two-step verification. And it's been standardized in the FIDO Alliance under the technical standard U2F, or Universal Second Factor. And that's really the use case here. The use case for this specific standard is the second factor bootstrap use case. And I'll talk a little bit more about that and show a demo towards the end of the slides here. And I think everything will become a little bit clearer. So these devices are specifically designed that they are inherently safe against phishing attacks. And again, I'll show a couple of slides in a moment here that shows how they protect against phishing. But really important to understand that these little fobs, the security key or the FIDO U2F standard, are inherently safe against phishing attacks. Even if an attacker tricks the user into exercising this device on a phishing website, the resultant signature that the device will generate will not pass validation on the server, and access would not be granted to the attacker. This is unlike current one-time password-based authentication solutions, which are still acceptable to phishing, or susceptible to phishing, I'm sorry. So the goal with these keys are that they firstly are safe, in other words, they protect against phishing. Second, they're easy for the user and for the administrator. For the user, you simply pop them into your USB port or click the button if they're attached to your mobile. And for the administrator to set it up, we'll talk about that too. For the administrator, it's really easy to roll out and administer. And then from a privacy standpoint, the user cannot be tracked across services, and all the key material remains on the key. So even though I use the same key across many different services and many different relying parties, none of those relying parties can track the same user using the same key across services. So privacy is inherently built into this technology. So the core idea behind these security keys really are standard public key cryptography, as is the standard behind all of the FIDO kind of technical standards here. Everything is based on public key cryptography. So the user's device, this little fob, mints a new key pair during registration, and the public key gets sent to the server. And then when you try to sign in or re-log in on a device, the server asks the user's device, the U2F device, the authenticator, to sign data to verify it's the user using this previously generated private key on the fob. And once the signature is generated, the server uses that signature and validates it using the public key that it has, and if everything matches, you're allowed in. And again, I will show you some of this in more detail in a couple of slides to come. So really, this enables that elusive one device, many services standard. So you can have one single security key, and you can use that across many different services. So let's kind of go in one level deeper, and let's talk a little about the protocol that enables all of this. So here I have a user, that's me. I'm trying to sign in to Google at this point. I'm using my corporate credentials here, and traditionally in a single step authentication or single factor authentication, what would happen when I enter my password in this field? The password would simply get sent to the server, right? That's pretty standard. That's normal logon 101, authentication 101. Trying to sign in from a client to a server, send the password to the server validates the password, and at that point in time, I'm signed in or not. The challenge, however, is if we kind of advance one slide forward here, who can tell me what the differences are between this slide and the following? And it's not only the arrow that disappeared. There's something else that changed. I'll show you again. Let's go back one slide, and let's go forward. Well, let's take a look at this a little bit more emphasized. Did you realize that the URL bar changed? So the URL bar in the initial login was google.com. However, here it's goggle.com. If we actually kind of take this to the hyperbole here and we go in here, we'll see, oh, well, this is obviously not the right Google site. But normally, fishers aren't that courteous to actually give us a new logo. So normally it'll look something like this, and users would actually go ahead, and if we think about what happens in an attack situation, users would enter their credentials into this password field, and obviously the bad guy would get this data and not the real rightful owner of the, or at least the right relying party. So if we kind of think a little bit backtrack here, how did the user get on this page in the first place? This is goggle.com. Clearly, bad guys don't only rely on typos that users make when entering URLs. Well, usually, this is the way that users get to phishing websites, right? Someone sends them an email, the email looks kind of okay, maybe kind of legitimate. The user ends up clicking on a link, and that link takes them straight to the bad page. So what happens when they're on the bad page? Well, let's take that a little bit further. User is on the bad page. They got there maybe by clicking on a phishing link. They go ahead, they enter their password. The bad guy gets the password. At this point in time, the bad guy sends the password to the real server, and the bad guy is logged in, right? That's a traditional, simple phishing attack. Now, obviously, phishing attacks, if we think multi-factor authentication, if there is a one-time password involved in this flow, the bad guy is still in the middle, right? They would simply get the one-time password as well when you enter it, so they'd still get access to your resources because they're kind of sitting in the middle of this login attack. So now let's look at how FIDO U2F or security keys solve this specific problem. So here we go again. I'm on the correct Google site this time, and we'll look at the bad example in a moment, but here's what happens when I'm on the right website and trying to use a security key. Well, firstly, I've got my device, I'm trying to sign into Google, but if we recall a couple of slides back, I have something else at my disposal. I have a security key. Security key is with me, with my device, so there's the security key at the bottom left. The security key has yet something else. The security key has a cryptographic private key that's stored locally inside the security key. That private key at this point has a corresponding public key, and that public key has been registered to the server against my account. So one part of this key is on the device, on the fob, and the other part of the key is with the relying party, Google in this case. So let's take a look at how the login process works with the security key. So first, I get prompted for my username and my password. I go ahead and I enter it. But in addition to sending the password to the server, I also send an additional signed blob. And that signed blob is what we see up here. That's what the security key represents. That's what the security key sent from the client over to the server. And the security key really promises a couple of things. The first one is, it says, I promise that a user is here. So the question is, how does the security key promise a user is here? It doesn't have a camera, it doesn't know. Well, it's got a button. And in order to generate a signature, you have to press the button on the security key at the point in time when you're trying to log in. So that's how the security key promises that someone was present when the login attempt occurred. So the button was pressed. That's one part of the signature that gets sent from the security key to the server. The second is a simple cryptographic challenge. And if you know anything about crypto, you'll know that a challenge is what's required in order to validate that a specific private key was present on the security key. So essentially, the server sends the challenge to the token sends the challenge in a signed format back to the server, and the server can then validate that the key indeed has the right, or the security key has the right private key, the right key material on the device in order to generate the signature. And then the last part here, which is really, really important, is something called the origin. That's part of the signature. Now, the reason why the origin is so important is whatever's filled in the URL bar at this point up top here makes up a part of the signature that gets sent to the server. So if you think about it, while I'm on the real google.com site, the correct origin would be in this blob here. However, if I'm on a bad website, that's not the real Google in this case, that origin would be a mismatch to what the server would be expecting, and the server will not allow the login attempt to happen. And we'll see that in a slide in a moment. So let's kind of continue this. The signed blob gets sent to the server, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, this blob is digitally signed, and the server, the green key there, is the public key that corresponds to the yellow key that's on the user's key fob. So essentially, a simple asymmetric crypto validation is done, or a signature validation is done, making sure that the signature here, the blue one here in the blob, was generated using the private key that the server expects, and the server validates that by using the green public key. So pretty simple. Let's take a look now at a fraudulent example and how FIDO can kind of stop that attack from happening. So here again, user is on the bad website, goggle.com, entering the password and pressing on the security key because the user doesn't know, it looks correct to them. So what happens is the password again is sent to the bad guy. Also, the crypto blob is sent to the bad guy. But this time around, the origin looks a little different. The origin says goggle.com and not google.com because that's what the client here, that's what the user is on. So when we take a look at the server trying to send the credentials, or the bad guy trying to send the credentials to the server, everything comes back to the server. The server looks at the signed, the signed blob here, and it says that goggle.com is not what I would expect to see. So it simply rejects the login because you're clearly not coming from the correct origin. So that's very, very simple, right? Obviously, this is kind of a little bit more complex if we look at the actual crypto and the actual messages, but in a nutshell, this is the way that FIDO, from a bootstrapping perspective, as in with U2F, tries to protect and guard the user against fraudulent, or at least attempts coming from fraudulent websites, such as attacks associated with phishing. So pretty straightforward here. So okay, let's go one slide in, right? Let's start talking a little bit about Google's experience and our case study. So firstly, we've deployed this all at Google. It is deployed firstly internally in the enterprise use case, so for all Google staff. We use security keys for every single login attempt. Everything inside Google is kind of FIDO U2F backed, so it forms the basis of all the authentication inside the company. Mandated for all Google employees, as I said, easily kind of integrated into our corporate single sign-on system on the web. We also use it for SSH. There's ways in which you can kind of use the same thing for SSH as well. But essentially, whenever we need to log in on a brand new machine or need to re-authenticate, a security key needs to be present in that process. Now, we've also, about 2.5 years ago, we've also enabled security keys for consumers. So if you are a Google user, let's say you have a Gmail address, you can get a security key online right now. And by the way, there's more than 20 vendors selling these security keys online. If you do a Google search for FIDO U2F Authenticator or FIDO U2F security key, you should be able to find quite a lot of these devices for sale online. And by the way, if they're certified with FIDO, they all work with Google. So you can buy any of these keys online. They range obviously also from a pricing perspective. So any of these keys, you can use that key, you can register it to your Google account, and you can use that as a way to securely sign into a Google account. And obviously it's not only Google that has adopted the use of FIDO U2F in this case. Dropbox, GitHub, Salesforce, Facebook recently, they've all adopted FIDO U2F as well as an additional second factor of choice. But still at this point in time, this is an option for consumers. You will still have your traditional two-step verification mechanisms available as well. For the enterprise use case here, that's the only option. There is no fallback. There is no SMS OTP. There is no key fob. You need to have a security key. That's what you need to have to sign in. On the consumer side, we give you a bit of a wider choice. However, if we look at the enterprise use case, which we want to get to, the external enterprise use case, in other words, enterprises using Google infrastructure, we want to give them the same ability that we give our administrators inside Google, and that is we want to give them a way to enforce the good properties of security keys and not allow any fallbacks. Because, to be honest, the moment that you allow fallbacks to happen, things like SMS OTP, for example, that's where the bad guys will focus. But we'll get to that in a second. So to remember for now, we've deployed it at Google, enterprise use case, as well as on the consumer side. So let's take a look at some of the data points here that we found from our enterprise deployment. So Google has had a two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication deployment before security keys, of course. We used to use OTPs inside the company. And here's some data that we published in our financial crypto paper that we published now, I think, a little bit over a year ago, that talks a little about some metrics with regards to security keys. So if we take a look here with the first graph here on the left, the bar chart, the time to authenticate came down. So we used to have one-time password-based authentication. It was key fob-based. We introduced security keys. If we simply look at the time to authenticate of Google employees, it came down from an average of 20 seconds to an average of less than 10 seconds. We think that's really, really good. And on the consumer side, if we look at the data there, we have three options today for consumers. We have one-time password via SMS. We have one-time password via app, such as Google Authenticator, and we have security keys. And even there, we'll see that the OTP right up there, roughly around 25, maybe in some cases close to 40 seconds before that one-time password gets entered that was sent via SMS. On the OTP via app side, we'll see that's roughly similar to the OTP via fob, roughly around 20 seconds. But look at that security key figure. Even there, roughly 10 seconds to do an authentication. And in some cases, you're the minimum 2-3 seconds before that user is logged on. So definitely from a user experience perspective, much, much better than what we had. So the little summary here, security keys, faster to use than one-time passwords. And that's not surprising, right? There's nothing to retype. There's nothing to pull out of your pocket. Hopefully, it's a simple click of a button, and away you go. So let's take a look at some more data here, right? So this is kind of internally to Google, our internal enterprise use case. And there's a lot of data on this chart. So let's see if we can kind of break it down a little bit. We'll see there on the left side, this is kind of support incidents per user per month. That's what we have here. That's kind of the on the axis here, on the Y, and then on the X-axis, it's time, right? So if we look from July 2014 to November 2015, you'll probably roughly see here that this pink line here represents the proliferation of security keys inside Google. So as we're rolling out more security keys, we are deprecating OTP fobs. So we can, for all intents and purposes, roughly say that by November 2015, we were all security keys. So everyone had security keys. There was almost no one-time passwords and fobs left inside the company. So if we look at this data here, what we really see is that the support incidents for one-time passwords really started off pretty high, right? So we started off here, lots of support incidents. We don't make available the exact figures, but you can see this is pretty high. As we would expect, security key incidents started off low because there wasn't a lot of keys deployed. But what's really interesting is even as we have larger deployment inside the company here on the pink line, we see that the OTP support goes down, as it should, because more security keys means less OTP fobs, but the blue line stays pretty flat. So even as we have 100% proliferation of security keys inside Google, the support associated with that is really, really low. And as we all know, support incidents directly translate into total cost of ownership. So we really think that security keys can save you money. Deploying them as your preferred multi-factor authentication option can save you money inside the company. Okay, so we've got all of this stuff, but we're not quite done. What else are we doing? And I promise this is kind of the last part of the presentation here. So we have Google's internal use case that we covered. We covered the consumer use case. If you're a Gmail user, yeah, sure, you can use security keys too. But what about mobile? We know that our users are increasingly mobile, and so far the fob that we looked at was pretty much, USB based. Secondly, how do we deploy this at scale? If you're an administrator and you use Google Apps or G Suite, for example, as your IDP and you use those applications, how do you deploy this to a whole organization in the way that we've done it inside Google? And lastly, what happens if user loses their keys? If they lose the fob, how do we recover them? Well, all great questions. So we've kind of focused specifically on trying to solve this problem for enterprises as we've deployed the same technology inside Google, and we've learned some lessons there. So at the end of last month, at the end of January 2017, we've launched a product called Security Key Enforcement. And really that allows G Suite administrators to enforce the use of security keys across their domains and organizational units. Now, the reason why I say enforce and why that's important is, as I mentioned earlier, if you still have fallback methods available, that's exactly what the bad guys will exploit. So it was important to be able to give administrators the choice to disable all other types of multi-factor authentication and only allow security keys to come in as the authentication factor. So we've done that. We've allowed and enabled tools for the admin to allow users to self-enroll for security keys. We've allowed them to manage lost and stolen security keys and assist users to recover from that state. And lastly, we've added advanced reporting capabilities so that administrators can report on the use of security keys inside the organization. So that's kind of on the one side here on the right that we see. And then on the left, on the mobile side, well, FIDO Alliance, we've recently certified the first Bluetooth Low Energy U2F authenticators. And we've done that with an interop event, an interoperability event in December 2016. And these devices, these Bluetooth Low Energy devices, are now available in the market. Again, if you search for BLE, FIDO, security key, you will find all these online. Now, having these authenticators communicate over BLE now makes it possible for us to support both Android and iOS devices as part of the launch. And Bluetooth Low Energy devices are now part of the FIDO standard. So what I want to do next is, if this allows me to do that, I want to show a quick little demo. So hopefully this will work. I've just done this recording late yesterday. And what this will show you, hopefully if this works, is a user trying to add their account on their iOS device. So this is a Google account I'm trying to add to my iOS device, but this account is protected with a security key. So let's see how that works. Entered my username, entered my password. I see a box pop up that says, I now need to pair a security key with this iOS device before I'm allowed to add my account to the phone. So at this point, it's guiding me through the pairing flow. I need to press the button on my security key for 5 seconds to get it into pairing mode. Once I do that, I see a list of all devices available for pairing. Once I click on it, optionally there might be a PIN code involved. That's what I see here. Once I enter my PIN code, at this point in time, my security key is now paired to my device, and my Google account that's protected with the security key is now enabled and registered on this specific device. So what's important there is if I didn't have the security key with me at that point in time, I would not be able to sign into that Google account. I have to present my security key even on iOS at the point in time when I'm trying to sign in to that specific account protected with the security key. So that's important. And then here, maybe as kind of a last slide here, how can you get started, right? So a couple of items here. There are some resources available, obviously, to use FIDO with Google, FIDO UTF with Google. You can enable two-step verification on your account at any time. Click on two-step verification, click on security keys, and you can view security keys. You can add security keys to your account, so that's pretty straightforward. You can also use security keys with GitHub, Dropbox, Salesforce, and Facebook as another entrant here that I should include. You can try that out. You've got a security key. And then lastly, you can play with some code, right? So Google open sources the U2F server code. You can download that from GitHub. So that's loosely based on the server that we use internally inside of Google. So you can use that. And then some other vendors such as Yubico, for example, they also have a list of libraries that you can use with other types of protocols and other services as well. So more than enough resources available to kind of get started. So with that, I am kind of done with the formal part of the presentation. I will hand back to Andrew for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Fantastic as always, and we have a lot of questions. So there's several questions about, well, characterized as usability. The comments are along the lines of, we understand how in the enterprise you can deploy external keys. Are there barriers to adoption for consumers? I mean, why has Google chosen to go with an external device for FIDO authentication, rather at least on the mobile, rather than the UAF experience? So just some thoughts on kind of general usability, Christian, for devices for consumer authentication.
Great, thanks, Harry. Great question. So I think let me kind of start with first by maybe just characterizing the use cases here, right? So there's predominantly 2 use cases that we encounter as users on a daily basis, right? There's the bootstrapping use case. That is the use case which says, I just bought a new device. Somehow I need to get my identity into this device in a secure fashion. That's kind of one use case. That's the one that we've specifically looked at trying to solve here with U2F, the universal second factor. So hopefully I will need my security key only once every 2 years when I upgrade to a new iPhone. I get the iPhone, I type my credentials, I press the button on my security key, and then I go and put my security key away. I never use it for the next 2 years until I need to rebootstrap a new device. That's one use case. There's a completely separate use case, equally important, and that's the reauthentication use case. So that's the one that says, I signed in using my username and my password today to sign into my banking app on my phone. Tomorrow, I don't want to type my username and password again. Maybe I just want to touch my fingerprint. Maybe I just want to do something really simple but equally strong to re-log into that same application. That's kind of the reauthentication use case, which is closer to what we refer to as the UAF use case, where I've already signed in securely at some prior point, but now I want to come back to that same service in an easy-to-use way, but I want to make sure that it's just as secure as my initial login. So here what we've tried to solve for is that initial bootstrapping experience, not necessarily the returning user. And the other part of this question, of course, is, well, why an external device? Why another fob? Yeah, we kind of get it, right? So no one really wants to carry around another fob. We've been through this process once before. However, we think there's kind of 2 important parts to this process. The first one is, hopefully this will be the last fob you carry for authentication. In the old days, when you kind of go to Wall Street, you look around there, you'll see the traders with these token necklaces, right? So it's a OTP fob for every service they interact with. With FIDO U2F, we're trying to break that mold. We're trying to say one single token to rule them all. So you'll have one token. Doesn't matter if this is for your Facebook account, if this is for your, online trading account, or if this is for your business account, same token can be used for all of these services. So you don't have to carry around multiple tokens. So hopefully that makes things slightly easier. Also, the other thing is, it's really the protocol here that's the valuable part. The FIDO U2F protocol is what ensures that we kind of guard against phishing attacks. So the easiest way for us as a company to get that protocol out there was simply to work with vendors to build low-power devices that implement this protocol. Of course, if we look kind of ahead here, we would love it if mobile phones implemented that exact same protocol. So think about it. If I go to a new laptop or desktop machine and I try to sign into my Google account, I should be able to pull out my phone from my pocket and use that as my security key. Yep, that's definitely a use case that we want, but that's orders of magnitude more complex than simply having a low-powered, simple USB device that I can plug into the port. So we want to start with the key fob, but that's not where we want to end. We do think that going forward, mobile devices can be one of the killer applications here for FIDO U2F or for FIDO in general, even for the bootstrapping use case. But it is important to remember, if I lose access to all my phones and all my laptops, I still need to go back somewhere to bootstrap trust from. So we believe that you will always need to have at least one physical factor, whether that's your ID card or whether that's a security key that you need to carry around or put in a safe somewhere. You're always going to need to go back to that single key to kind of relight up the experience on your devices if you lose access to all of them. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Christian. Another question we have multiple questions on is a little bit more detail on the lost key scenario. So what happens, if an employee or a consumer, left their key on a bus, whatever it might be? How do you handle that situation? How does Google handle it? And how does the U2F protocol handle that scenario?
Right, great question. So quick and easy answer where I'll start is the U2F protocol doesn't talk at all about the lost key use case. That's something normally to be kind of left up to the implementer, but I can talk a little bit about how we handle it internally at Google and how we have built the support into our external customer-facing, our enterprise-facing product. So at Google, let me kind of start off firstly by saying, remember, this is the second factor, right? This isn't your primary factor. So if someone loses this key somewhere on a bus, there is not that immediate urgency to be like, oh, gee, this guy now needs to phone tech support to get the security key revoked from his account ASAP. The security key by itself, there is nothing that anyone, when they look at that security key or interrogate it, where they can get access to any secret or any information to tell them which user this key belongs to. So that's kind of the first point. That's part of the FIDO protocol. As part of the privacy process there. So if someone picks up a security key in the middle of the street, they cannot interrogate that security key to give up any secrets or give up any information about who it belongs to. So immediately the urgency of removing it from an account is kind of removed and mitigated a little bit. But obviously, if the user lost their only security key, they might be in trouble. So let's talk about Google's use case first. At Google, we issue employees with multiple security keys. I have a security key for every device I own, and I have a security key that I carry around on my keychain. So whenever I lose a security key, I usually have other backup security keys, which I can then use to re-enroll another security key when I order it. So that's pretty straightforward, but we know that not all organizations will want to take that route. So for organizations who issue users with a single security key, for those organizations, we do have recovery options, but here's now where we get into the implementation specific details and the way that we've decided to implement this. We've decided to implement this on the enterprise side by giving the admin, so the domain administrator, options and controls where they can go and temporarily disable security key for a certain account and give the user over the phone, hopefully over the phone or hopefully even in person, give them a rescue code which they can then use for a one-time login to register a new security key onto their account. So what will happen in that case is the security key will be suspended temporarily. They will get a one-time code that's valid for a certain duration, let's say a day or an hour, and they need to use that code within that time period to re-register a new security key. Yes, obviously at that point in time, we're weakening the account security properties because now we don't have the anti-phishing controls, but because the bad guy, short from following a user and stealing their key, can't force the user into that state, we believe that these two are statistically independent so that a fraudster, a remote attacker, will not be able to get a user in this state to exploit them. So we kind of believe from our perspective and our risk modeling that that's okay. But every organization, when they deploy U2F, can make their own decision around how they want to handle the lost security key use case.
Okay, thank you. Here's a good one, Christian. Your case study, shared good details on timed authentication, usability, things like that. Have you detected yet any noticeable decrease in attacks, phishing attacks, credential attacks, and similar based on our use of FIDO authentication? Is that something you've been able to quantify or study at Google?
Yeah, so I mean, it's absolutely something that we look at internally. That's usually not the type of data we make available publicly. What I can say is that the protection afforded with U2F is adequate to the extent of us not having seen it being broken at this point in time. So in other words, if we have a user with a security key, we've never seen someone circumvent that from the pure standpoint of trying to trick a user into going to a phishing site and typing in credentials. The security key has always been enough to block that attack from happening. Of course, there are still other types of attacks out there, right? Attacks where I phone up a user and convince them that I'm the CEO and I need them to transfer money to some other place, right? I mean, that types of attacks are still there, the social engineering attacks, but the remote phishing attack, the thing that the Verizon data breach report talks about, that 2/3 of incidents in 2015 were related to, that thing, we believe we've kind of got that covered from a security key standpoint.
Okay, great. So here's a Google question. What's holding Google from ditching the password altogether? I mean, do you believe in a passwordless future? And if so, what are the key steps to getting there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So again, the FIDO U2F use case is kind of orthogonal to the passwordless use case. For U2F specifically, or for the second factor, we still need to have a first factor, right? So it won't be enough to just have a security key, because then all I have to do is I have to go swipe your security key from your badge, and now I can log in as a user. So we still believe that multi-factor is important in this instance. Now, obviously, there's different types of factors, right? There's the something I know factor, which is a password. And hey, maybe with security keys being so strong, we can drop the password complexity rules. And again, that's something that we advocate for, right? These complex passwords that many services ask you to have, where you need to enter special characters and capital letters and lowercase letters. When you have security keys in place, you don't have to have those complex passwords anymore. You can have a 4-digit PIN. Like if you think about your bank card, the thing that protects your money, right? An ATM card. When you stick that into the ATM, a 4-digit PIN code is more than enough because you have the strong proof of credential in your hand. That's what security key enables you. So on the one hand, if you think about password, ditching passwords, maybe in exchange for a PIN code. I know that's not maybe where the ask or the question was going, but I mean we can ditch passwords for PIN codes pretty easily using FIDO U2F because we have such a strong second factor credential. If we are thinking about getting rid of any kind of a knowledge factor, the only thing that we can replace that with maybe is a something I am factor, right? Something like a biometric. But because one of the key FIDO principles are that we will only be storing biometrics locally, that will only help you until you go to a new device. When you move to a new device, you'll need some kind of an additional factor again. And the only factor we have at our disposal at that point is the something I know factor. So short of trying to, I guess, read the user's mind to figure out what they're thinking or who they are, we have to have some kind of a transitory property manifest, and passwords or PIN codes are really one of the easiest ways to do that. I think that over the next couple of years here, and as we're kind of going forward, we will probably start to lower our reliance on strong passwords. I think that's something that will start to happen, but until we can be truly passwordless, even for bootstrapping, there's some other things on the physical layer that needs to kind of fall into place first. And I'd be happy to at some point talk a little bit about that. But the short answer here is that for bootstrapping, it's still important to have that kind of elusive first factor. And the best first factor we can come up with right now is still something I know, such as a PIN code or a password.
Okay, great. So let's start to wrap this up. There's a good question here, which I think we can end on. What do you see as the biggest barriers to adoption of FIDO authentication? Second factor biometric. What do you think is holding the marketplace back from widespread adoption of FIDO authentication?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the one part of that question already got answered, or at least asked to a certain extent, or maybe self-answered, which is physical hardware, right? I mean, whenever you have the need for something physical that someone needs to go out and buy and manage, that's hard. I think that's one barrier here, right? One barrier is there's something physical. Now, obviously, this is kind of scale, right? So on the one end of the scale, we have the cost and the efforts associated with managing and procuring these keys and carrying them around. And on the other side of the scale, we have, attacks and peace of mind. So I think FIDO U2F with the current state where we have the physical token, which is fairly low cost, right? That's kind of a good balance where there's some organizations who will say, you know what, I need to be that little bit more cautious. I want to make sure that I have this advanced phishing protection in place. For them, the scale will tip in the favor of protection, not necessarily on the cost side. But at this point, the scale is kind of nicely balanced that many organizations will say, you know what, for this additional issue and then the additional trouble that I'm going to have in managing these keys or rolling them out, maybe I'm kind of okay with what the traditional one-time password-based multi-factor authentication solution gives me. So it's kind of, at this point, like 50-50. I think on the one side, depending, again, on your own risk modeling, for us internally at Google, clearly we kind of work in favor of having this advanced phishing protection in place. So for us, the cost isn't that important, and it's cost associated with the rollout, of course. I think on the other side, once these things start manifesting virtually, once they're available in mobile phones and other places, I think at that point in time, the scales will tip heavily in favor of having this protection built in, because really it is the only technology out there today that really protects you against these types of threats. There's nothing else like it out there. I think the other part of this question is, what about the built-in use cases? There, I believe the only thing holding us back is support on the devices, right? If we think about the traditional, the UAF-like use cases, right, the re-authentication use cases, users shouldn't even, be asked to make a choice to use it. It should just be in the device, and it should just be used. And the conversations that I've had so far with large relying parties, some of them in the financial services sector, some of them in the health insurance and in the insurance space, I believe that if the technology is available in the devices, pretty much everyone will use it, right? But I think that the big thing there is still, so it's adoption on two sides. On the U2F side, it's adoption of the consumer of the token. And on the enterprise side, on the actual application developer side, it's adoption of the technology in the phone platform. And we know that is moving forward. I mean, it is actually accelerating daily, and I think we have folks in FIDO that's much more equipped to speak to that than I am. But from what I'm seeing from the outskirts here, is that definitely there's acceleration on the adoption of these technologies by OEMs, by device manufacturers. So this is definitely moving in the right direction. I think it's really just a question of time.
Very good. So thank you everybody for coming. One last note. So we have a very vibrant ecosystem within FIDO and a bunch of very active members. you may recall from one of our prior seminars that we have over 300 FIDO certified products on market. Many of those members or several are attending this call and have reminded me to let you know that there's a variety of open source kind of turnkey server solutions available from FIDO members. I'd encourage you to visit the FIDO Alliance website, which is fidoalliance.org, and check out either the new FIDO Certified Showcase or the listing of FIDO Certified products to learn more about these offerings from our various vendors. So with that, I'd like to thank Christian today for sharing Google's case study, and thank all of you for attending. Again, this will be archived. We will be sharing the presentation materials with you in the follow-up email. And when you log off, again, please take a moment to fill out the survey, as we greatly value your opinions. So thank you all very much. Have a good day.